Thanks for joining us today for Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They're recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 300 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you have questions for our speaker, we will have her information on the last slide of the presentation today. A special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veteran Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSVC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans. Please visit their website for more information. And now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. More information is on our website. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach more than 19,700 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us with the pricing information with the email shown on your screen. And now to introduce our speaker, Alessia Smotrova. Welcome, Alessia. We're glad to have you here with us today, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
All right, thank you very much for having me. Today we're going to talk about the smart way of doing capture. Next slide, please. So just a little bit before we get started about OST Global Solutions, we've won our clients over 22 billion government contracts since 2005, and we do pipeline development, capture, proposal consulting, and we also teach you how to do that. So we actually have really cool courses on foundations of business development capture and proposals and advanced capture and proposals and every aspect of proposal development. We also have apprenticeships, which are first in a nation registered with the Department of Labor, that actually allow to train your government business development personnel in every aspect of business development life cycle. And we're home to an incubator for government contractors. So we do a lot of really cool things for government contractors, making sure that we contribute to your development. Next slide, please. So let's set the context for smart capture. Smart capture is understanding where it actually, the first step in smart capture is understanding how it all fits in the overall big picture. A company has got to do a lot of things right for an engine of business development to churn. And the engine of business development actually has 9 steps that are iterative. Think of it as an analogy from the Good to Great book that talks about a really heavy flywheel that you have to turn, and you push and push and push, and it's incredibly heavy, and you have to turn that flywheel once, twice, 3 times, 10 times, 100 times, and eventually it catches, and then it catches momentum, and it starts going on its own faster and faster and faster and faster, so that you have business growth that seems like it's doing it by itself. You don't actually have to put this ginormous amount of effort that it takes to do it. But initially, you can think of the whole machine as a series of steps that actually take place from building capacity to do business with the government, when you actually have to add capabilities. Let's say that you're lacking any kind of certifications, any kind of personnel, any kind of facilities, facility clearance, for example, all of these different things that your customer keeps asking for in the RFPs, but you don't have that. You either have to no bid or outsource things. So you're constantly investing into your company based on what feedback your business development machine actually is giving you. And you also need to conduct at least annually strategic business development planning sessions that are informed by your market research, figuring out what you want to do, what you want to go bid on, and how you're going to grow, and what opportunities are must-win opportunities, so that you know exactly where your money is going to come from and what money you're going to spend on business development effort. Do you have enough to sustain your ambitious growth goals? Once you have enough information to make decisions, we are off to step number 4, which is market to the feds and partners. That is where you got to do your legwork, which, in times of COVID, may be a little interesting, but you have to do your legwork BD, where you have to meet with people. You have to learn about their needs and present your capabilities, and you're going to feed your pipeline. That way, you also, in step number 5, going to go ahead and do a lot of desk side research, looking at expiring opportunities, looking at opportunity announcements, and qualify your opportunities in the pipeline continuously so that you fill that pipeline with bids, so that you have enough to bid on this month, next month, and months after, the next month, half a year from now, 2 years from now, 1 year from now, so to speak, right? So it's a time-based kind of list of opportunities, dynamically updated, constantly developed, that you have to keep on hand. And after you decide that you've qualified the opportunity, you commit to it. You commit resources, which is time of your personnel and money, and you conduct the longest step in the whole business development lifecycle, which is capture, step number 7. See how many steps it takes for you to even start the capture process? And the capture process is the longest step in the whole business development lifecycle. It takes about a year to 2 years, which is basically your smart preparation prior to the proposal phase to get you there to arrive at the proposal in style, so that winning is a slam dunk. Then finally you prepare a proposal, and then you develop business during project execution, where you upsell to the client, get the mods, to add money to your contracts, learn about new opportunities, feed your capture efforts, and existing pursuits. And a lot of companies, unfortunately, skip the whole capture process. They just start with the proposal. They skip all the other steps all along too. They expect to grow because they see an RFP that looks interesting, and they go ahead and bid. So that's the problem, and you need capture in order for you to win the proposal. Next slide, please. So when you think of it, capture is pre-proposal preparation. It takes place from deciding to pursue an opportunity to the draft and final RFP issuance. Now, some of you remember you either were one or you knew one, as in like students in college who could not attend the course, not do the homework, but then come to an exam and ace it. And it worked really well when the professor wasn't difficult, the course wasn't difficult, and you were very, very smart, and you knew how to take exams. It becomes much more problematic when you're trying to apply the same thing to business development, and all of a sudden you are that cheeky smart person that says, hey, I can pretty much ace anything without preparation, and I can go ahead and basically show up and write a great proposal and win. Well, when the competition is easy, when the procurement is easy, when you're one of the very few that qualify, it works really well, not when it is a challenge. So you want to make sure that you prepare properly, because hope to win is not a strategy. You want to run proper capture. And proper capture, when you really think about capture, right? So you think of something like a Shipley process, right? 96 steps, and there's lots of plans, lots of slide decks to develop, and if you do it by the book, it would take you a whole team of consultants a very long time to go ahead and win a really huge contract. But over the years, I found that there's only 6 things that you need to do. It's a holistic approach. All of these things are dependent on one another, right? So that's why our approach with T-capture process is really as a Venn diagram. So you have only 6 areas of capture. You have customer engagement, intelligence gathering, win strategy development, competitive analysis, teaming, and solution development. And all of these areas overlap. So if you take one out, everything else gets impacted. Everything else gets less rich, less effective. So that's a whole concept behind the Venn diagram that you have here of all those 6 areas of capture. Next slide, please. And speaking of simplifying, right? So you go from 96 to 6, and you are talking about really how do you pragmatically, how in a current environment, how do you actually go ahead and win business and try to do it effectively? There's only 5 goals that business development and capture has. And I've seen people who have been, I myself have worked at Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. I've supported and trained all the top 5 government contractors, right? And OST does currently in government agencies like NASA, for example, and Treasury. So we do the training. We have the most sophisticated systems for business development training and approaches, but it all boils down to 5 things, right? So first one is the goal of business development is identify opportunities and customers. You have to have enough things to bid on. If you don't know what you're going to be bidding on, you're not going to be growing. If you're not bidding, you're not winning, right? So number 2 is avoid competition altogether by adding scope to an existing vehicle or getting a sole source award. Get rid of the competition. It just takes money and time from the government, from you. If you're a great contractor, you give them a fair price. If you can do it without having to write a competitive proposal and having them wait half a year to a year to a year and a half, deal with the protests, and incur all of these expenses, then do it. Do it. Number 3, if you can't get a sole source, you reduce the competitor pool by changing the type of competition. For example, instead of bidding in a full and open competition as a large business competing against a strong large business prime, you want to drive the procurement to a small business set aside where you have higher chances of winning with a highly experienced small business development, small business prime partner, right? So you can shift it around, flip it over, and now you have higher win probability. And number 4 is get the customer to look forward to receive your proposal and award the contract to you. Get them excited. That's a tricky part, right? As you may understand, but that's a capture feat and business development feat, right? So as you can see, the goals are overlapping. Capture at some point is not so concerned with the pipeline. They are concerned with individual pursuits, but they're working in tandem, the BD and the capture person trying to achieve certain goals. BD looks at the whole portfolio. Capture looks at individual opportunities. Goal number 5, finally, and that's kind of a funny one, is make every preparation step serve the purpose of writing a highly compelling proposal. What I see a lot of the times is capture is such a thinker's job, right? So strategic, so lofty, and a lot of the times they're very practical goals that come from capture. Every meeting, every thinking effort, every research effort should yield an artifact that goes straight into your proposal, right? If you're having teaming discussions, you have a write-up on why you chose that particular teaming partner that goes into your proposal. If you have a brainstorming session, you should have a graphic, a paragraph, a solution, something that goes into your proposal, and so on and so forth. If you're talking about win strategy, you should have win themes that go into your proposal. We're going to talk about that later. Next slide, please. So customer engagement is the obvious component of capture. We're going to identify the right decision makers, build the relationship, collect and document intelligence, influence the requirements, and vet your solution. Again, distilling this great complex thing to only 5 things you do in this area. Next slide. So here's a tool. What I wanted to do with this presentation is not just lecture at you, but give you very practical tools you can use right away in your capture efforts. And this tool is one of my favorites in the customer engagement arena. It is a matrix that looks at every possible member that's going to be looking at your proposal in source selection, their profile, their attitude towards us, positive, negative, or neutral, and top 3 hot buttons, because your proposals are written to individuals. Those individuals are going to decide whether you win or lose. You're not sending proposals into the void called the government, right? You're sending them to specific people who are going to be evaluating them and deciding who's going to be the winner. Speaking to those people, speaking their language, making them happy is what's really, really important in this whole process. So this is my favorite tool. You actually need to understand your audience and write to that audience. So next slide, please. The next step, you start layering that Venn diagram. As you can see, you start adding circles. It gets more complex, more rich. And here in intelligence gathering, you've got to perform ethical research from open sources, right, to gain the right intelligence that's necessary to win. You need to know your sources. You need to know where to look. Every capture manager needs to understand which database is going to yield you what information. What are the locations, free or paid, you're going to use to get the right kinds of data? If you're not a good researcher, you're probably a pretty average or substandard capture manager. You may be a great people person and you make up for that lack of research on some level. But imagine if you knew how to research properly and combined your outstanding people skills with that, you would be unstoppable, right? So you want to make sure that if you're somebody capturing that opportunity, if you're a business owner or you're a business development professional, you understand where things hide, right? Where do you go to find out when the 8A status expires? Free resource and paid resource. Where do you find out how the government is doing the procurement process? What is behind the curtain? What's going on? Where do you go? All of that information, a lot of the times, is available if you know where to look. And you want to pass the information to the proposal team in a useful form. So let's go to the next slide. The tool I want to share with you is the one that is useful to pretty much everybody, and it is site visits, industry days, bidders conferences, intel gathering, little checklist, right? So here is my checklist and advice to gather information at these events. First, bring the right people. Make sure you have subject matter experts going there who can understand a lot more than a generalist that does business development. Number two is come prepared. Do not trust your memory unless you have an eidetic memory and you're incredible and a genius. If you're like a normal person like me, for example, you're not going to remember the materials you read a few months ago about that opportunity when you decided to chase that. And now that there is an industry day, you show up to listen. Boo-hoo, right? A real pro will go ahead and reread all the materials about that opportunity the customer has ever published prior to that industry day, so that you come prepared, so that you can identify the subtle deltas in information, any movements, any progress that could feed you with data. Another one is carefully craft questions, because you're going to be within the earshot of competitors. It doesn't mean that you're constantly sitting there silent like a lot of people do. A lot of the times just sitting there silent, it does not let you take advantage of that opportunity fully. Carefully crafted questions with competition in mind may be really effective. You can even start a little uprising where, for example, the customer has certain requirements and you don't want them, they don't suit your business. There may be other businesses there in the audience that are not happy about those requirements, so you can get them to gang up on the government, for example. Number four is request documents. And if the government mentions some documents, you're not the incumbent, then go ahead and say, hey, can you set up a reading library where we can look at those documents? It's not fair for us not to know what's in there. The incumbent does, right? If you're the incumbent, of course, you want to prevent that. So shape the requirements. Number five, you want to make sure that you impact the statement of work, the evaluation criteria, the instructions, all kinds of things in the RFP, so you give the government the advice. If you can, again, be mindful of the competition. What can you push on within the earshot, what you can't, but that may be a good opportunity for you to say something aloud. Size the customer. Look at who is showing up to this industry days. A lot of the times, lots of people who are going to be in source selection evaluation will show up, present, or just sit in the audience. If you want to write down their names and titles, you need to know who they are. That gives you fodder for that table that I was showing you. Number seven is listen closely. Lots of people miss all kinds of sudden cues, like, for example, lessons learned, needs to be improved, innovation required. All of these are a little bit of a smoke that could be indicating a fire. You want to investigate what is there. Number eight is size the competition. Always get the attendee list from the government, even if they didn't automatically publish that. They normally do, but if they haven't, ask for it. See who the competition is. If you're in person, there at the event. Whenever they start holding those events in person, then go ahead and look around, right? So don't just keep to yourself. See who is sitting with whom. Make helpful suggestions. Number 10, make sure that, again, you're not just missing the opportunity to communicate with the government. Sometimes that's maybe one of the very few opportunities you get to talk to them, for them to see you. You introduce yourself proudly, you give them a helpful suggestion that is in the best interest of the government, and that doesn't, again, tip your hand with the competition. You may introduce yourself and socialize your PM at the end, where, you know, if it's an in-person event, again, after the COVID is done, an in-person event, and you will see lots of people are going to be rushing the stage. The government may be lingering there. It's where you may actually bring in your program manager, introduce, have them put a face to a name, have a little chit chat. So that's a useful interaction. Maybe ask a question, and then document everything immediately. I cannot underemphasize the importance of taking notes. Next slide, please. So win strategy development is often missed by small businesses. Win themes, messages, strategic action plan, effective capture planning are all components of that. Next slide. So the building blocks of an effective win theme are feature, benefit to the customer, and proof. So feature must be what it is that we offer, must be quantitative and qualitative. The benefit to the customer must answer the questions, what's in it for the customer, how so, and so what, so the customer doesn't have to guess and think. And proof will build confidence and credibility and make your features believable. Next slide. So here's what I'm going to share you as a tool. And we conduct these win strategy development sessions with clients all the time, and it's one single largest factor in increasing win probability. And that is where we flip the whole script, right? We don't start with the feature that is important to you. We start with the benefit that's important to the customer. And then go ahead and try to find a feature or try to find proof that would help us produce that benefit. If we can't, we conduct the gap analysis. And that gap analysis will lead us to go ahead and develop a list of action items, which are actually your win strategies. So you don't ever have to write as your win strategy that will provide best value, lowest priced solution, and where the small business with the large business capabilities and all kinds of boring stuff like that, right? So you want to make sure that you develop really targeted win strategies that get you closer to winning. Next slide, please. Step number 4 is competitive analysis. You want to identify likely competitors, their teams, identify competitors' strengths and weaknesses, determine competitors' win strategies, neutralize their strengths and exploit their weaknesses, and then adjust your win strategy approach and price. Next slide. So what you want to do as part of your competitive analysis is to conduct the price to win. The price to win is basically an exercise where you conduct the black hat, which is competitive analysis, and then you determine what prices your competitor may bid in order for them to beat anybody else, and then you adjust your price based on that. Next slide. The tool that I'm going to present to you is something that you may already know, but it's incredibly useful in business development, and it's done during a black hat or a mini black hat where you just basically sit down, and maybe you or you and a couple of colleagues, and you jot down strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And strengths and weaknesses are internal to your company. External are opportunities and threats, and the same with your competitors. So you analyze yourself, you analyze your competitors, and then you compare. And based on that, you come up with the action items that are going to also contribute to your win. Next slide, please. Teaming. Teaming is the 5th aspect of capture. You want to use systematic method instead of hasty emotional decisions. So don't use a Bob factor. Bob factor basically goes like that. look at this new pursuit. I did the gap analysis, and we don't do this area. Who does this area? Let me think. Oh, Bob's company does that. Let me go ahead and dial Bob. Hey, Bob. Hey, we haven't talked in a long time. Need to have beer soon. Yeah, absolutely. Love to catch up with you. Hey, I'm looking at this opportunity. Have you heard about it? No? Hey, do you want a team on that? Hey, let me send you an NDA. Let's talk about it in greater detail. And now, next thing you know, that Bob is on your team. You never did any kind of analysis to select the best teammates to cover every requirement. You haven't vetted your teammates. Maybe you've worked with Bob before, so the vetting is there, but you haven't made sure that the customer, for example, is excited about that, and who else the customer may want to have for that. And you want to negotiate for success to sign binding teaming agreements with those good teaming partners that you bring on. Next slide. So the really cool tool that I love is the one I'm going to leave with you here. And by the way, just scratch out the pippers there on the last column. That's gone, that's defunct. So just the CPARS stayed as a database for past performances. But it is a matrix that allows you to look at every single past performance for you and for the teaming partners. And then go ahead and look at each statement of work area and see where you have zero past performance or capability but limited or no past performance, capability and past performance in a different agency, capability and past performance in the same or similar agency, or where it's incumbent past performance. And you can go ahead and fill that out before approaching a teaming partner, because you can get that data publicly. And then after that, have a teaming partner fill theirs out, make the corrections, backfill the gaps on your team, use this matrix to select writers for your proposal. So this matrix is incredibly rich, and it's one of those tools that where I can tell, like, if somebody, a capture manager, doesn't have a tool like that, that's probably because they have a very small team and they don't need it, like 1 or 2 companies, or they just don't know what they're doing, right? So be the one who's in the know. Always have a matrix like that that actually points out all the gaps. So you'll never have a situation when on the proposal, you don't know who's going to write a specific area because you don't have the expertise and you have holes in your past performance. Next slide, please. So solution development is the 6th stage of capture. That's where everything comes together. That's where you postulate the requirements, guessing what's going to come out in the RFP, making an educated guess, right, based on past RFPs, based on drafts, based on capture data, brainstorm on winning approach and technical management and other key areas, select the past performance, references on key personnel, determine proposal price, and stage the material for proposal in advance, because 30 days you typically get, or even less, are not enough for you to percolate. Get into that RFP, wrap your brains around it, brainstorm, iterate, and then figure out an original solution is going to beat all the competition. You want to do it in advance. You want to do as much as possible in advance. And yes, you want to invest into that in advance and not be afraid to spend money on capture, because the companies with really high win rates actually spend 60% of their budget on capture, only 30% of their budget on proposals, and 10% for that post-submission kind of interaction with the government when we may be writing final proposal revision, doing orals and things like that. Next slide, please. So the requirements postulation is based on old RFP, draft RFP, your own RFP. You may actually put together from old agencies RFPs for other pursuits, any other agency statement of work for similar work, and you can then modify them based on your intel. Next slide. You want to interview subject matter experts individually. That's a less preferred approach, but beats boilerplate reuse option, which always makes your proposals worse unless you're really, really surgical about applying that boilerplate. Trust me on that. It requires the proposal writer to have a solutions architect's mind to tie everything together. If they're that spider that has a web where they pull a thread and they get the information from the right people, they need to be somebody who has that solution architect's mind, and requires solid interviewing techniques. Next slide. You want to Use brainstorming. That's a preferred method. Is you want to warm up and generate massive quantity of ideas without judgment. Use silent idea generation or with discussion where people come up with ideas basically individually and just pasting them in one spot or discussing them with others. Allow everyone to write down reorder ideas while others generate theirs. And then you order, sort, prioritize, and weed. Next. You also could start with a flow chart and actually look at the steps of the process. If there are many steps involved, that's the appropriate method. You want to discover process efficiencies, shortcuts, pinpoint the spots where you could bring innovations and efficiencies. In flowchart, your entire technical approach. Next step. Next slide. So you could also start with a graphic, which is concept of operations, OV1, overview graphic. You look at every key piece of the program and look at the customer challenges, your solution, what constitutes mission success, and put them all in one comprehensive graphic that shows them that you know how to absolutely blow their socks off in execution of the program. Next slide. So you could start with the schedule. You could plan out the project in detail, sequence it correctly to include predecessors and successors, discover parallel activities and time savings, develop critical path, resource load your schedule, and describe your schedule in your narrative. Next slide. And you could also start with a checklist, which is basically a disciplined decision making. Instead of boilerplate, you can actually go ahead and make decisions. Hey, you know, here are the kinds of things I need to decide in a management approach, for example, and speed up your thinking process instead of reusing information and trying to pepper it lightly with the new RFP's conditions. Next slide. When you arrive at the RFP release date and style, you have all kinds of materials ready. Your solution, all the pre-staged materials, your proposal plan, and then you are more likely to win that proposal. The team is able to go straight to draft. There is less rework. Solutions are more mature. There's a more polished final product to your proposal, and there's less stress, and you're much more likely to win. Next slide. If you have any questions, that's the contact information. So shoot an email, and we'll get back to you and answer those questions.
Thank you, Alessia, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us. And thank you to everyone who joined us. The recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. Please join us this Friday as we cover each part of the FAR, and join us next Wednesday for more hot topics in federal contracting.